Hey guys, Bonnet here, and man, are the Paradox Pokemon really cool. But the one thing that has always bugged me about them is the fact they all have the same vanilla, boring abilities. Now, don't get me wrong, Photosynthesis and Quark Drive can be incredibly valuable in some instances, especially with Booster Energy giving you that automatic proc ability, but what if all of these Pokemon had a standard ability as their hidden ability? I think that would be really cool. And I actually totally got this idea from someone in the PPO fan Discord named Fox, so big shouts to them. But today, we're going to be looking over each of the Paradox Pokemon and giving them a standard ability outside of just the Photosynthesis and Quark Drive. So if you guys do enjoy this discussion video, be sure to drop a like, as well as subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 3,000 subscribers, and I appreciate it a ton if you help me out along that journey. And yeah, with that being said, we can kind of jump into it. I am going to do this in order of past Paradox, future, and then, you know, the important ones that just recently got added, Moth and Wake Iron Leaves and Running Moon Valiant, because those are the coolest ones, and they get the most, you know, focus and things like that. So yeah, we can go ahead and jump right into it. For Great Tusk, we are going to be rocking out with Sand Force. Now, this Pokemon screams big Sand Force energy, to me at least. When you find it in the game, you see it in the desert. I totally forget the name of the desert itself, but could you imagine this thing on your sand team with your Gigalith, your Hippowdon, whatever it may be, clicking Sand Force boosted headlong rushes, as well as clicking really strong Stone Edges, and even a really strong Heavy Slam. I think alongside Terra, maybe a Terra Steel set could be really, really menacing for a lot of teams. This thing is just like Sand Force Excadrill on crack. I think it would be really, really fun, and it would exemplify like that brutish, like brute force aspect of Great Tusk really, really well. I think it would be a lot of fun to use. And again, it fits it thematically, and that's going to be something I try and do with all these, is I want it to somewhat fit, you know, at least the vibe of the Pokemon. Maybe not exactly down to the T to the lore, but I want it to at least make sense for all of them. And being that we find it in the desert, I feel like Great Tusk is definitely, you know, a worthy Pokemon to get access to Sand Force. Next up, we have Screamtail. Now, Screamtail is one I actually had a lot of trouble with, and big shouts to all my buddies who helped me out with this. This is one that Amel actually came up with. Big shouts to Amel, and that is going to be Wonder Skin for Screamtail. So if you guys are like me, you didn't really know what Wonder Skin did. I had no idea what Wonder Skin did at all before this, because it's not really an ability you see on a lot of Pokemon. There's two Pokemon in the decks right now that have it in Venomoth and Bruxish. Other than that, it's Skitty, Delcatty, and Sigilyph, and even then, it's not the ability they typically use. But what Wonder Skin does is status moves with accuracy checks are 50% accurate when used on this Pokemon. So that means if you try to Toxic my Screamtail, if you try to Will-O-Wisp, Thunder Wave it, Taunt it, anything like that, it will be 50% accurate. And I think that would be really, really cool to see on Screamtail. Again, it fits the vibe somewhat, like the vampire kind of aesthetic idea, and, you know, the past monster. I don't know, maybe not as much, but I think it's really cool on a Pokemon that is really going to be stopped by a lot of those, you know, status moves, whether it be status conditions or getting it taunted or even encored or a bunch of these things. It's going to make this thing really, really obnoxious to take down, because you're just going to have to go full bore head on right into the Screamtail. And I think that's a really cool idea for it, because now it makes those Calm Mind sets a little bit more viable. Now it makes those like Wishing sets a little bit more viable, because I'm going to be able to keep my team healthy while really being able to avoid status myself, especially because I can't, you know, function as a cleric on my own. Some other ideas we had were Soundproof or Cacophony, which is like the old version of Soundproof that is in the game, but it could be cool to give it like the old version of the ability just because it's a past Paradox Pokemon. I don't know. But there's definitely some cool options for Screamtail, but I really like this one from Amel, especially the more he explained it to me. It made a lot of sense and was pretty darn cool. Next up is probably the one I had the most trouble with, actually, and that's going to be Brute Bonnet, and I really, really struggled with finding an idea for it. First up, I was kind of thinking, you know, it being a fungus and still kind of being like that mushroom type Pokemon like Amoonguss, despite not being a poison type, having those fungus qualities. I think potentially Poison Touch could be a great, you know, addition to this Pokemon, or Effect Spore, just like regular Amoonguss's ability. But we ended up also talking about Stakeout. And again, this is another Amel suggestion. Stakeout is a pretty incredible ability that's on some pretty mediocre Pokemon, so I would love to see it used more often. Stakeout, what it does is essentially if a Pokemon is switching out, the Pokemon that switches in, the offensive stat that you're attacking it with is going to be doubled on that target. So my attack would be doubled on something switching in, taking that, you know, crunch, and that would make this thing an absolute monster when it comes down to it, you know, clicking an attack on the switch and things like that, which I think could be cool. Again, it's a Pokemon that hides and kind of waits a little bit, kind of like a stakeout, so it would make a little bit of sense. It, kind of fits the vibe of it like it does with like a Mabo Stiff or a Gumshoes or something similar, so I thought that was a pretty cool one, but this one I had a lot of trouble with. Let me know if you have any ideas. I also thought maybe Arena Trap, but honestly, it didn't really fit because it's a mushroom, not like a Venus Flytrap or anything like that, so yeah. Next up, we have Flutter Mane, and this is going to be a boring one, but I didn't want to just completely break the Pokemon. It's already broken enough as is. I don't want to give it something crazy to make it incredibly strong and more broken, despite it already being an uber Pokemon. I decided to give this thing Levitate because it's floating above the air, same abilities, Mischievous and Mismagius, so I felt like it made the most sense. For it. And again, if we give Flutter Mane something offensive, like you pull up with a Sheer Force Flutter Mane, it's probably not going to be a good time for your opponents. And I didn't want to break it at the very least. You still want, people to be able to somewhat use it and things like that. So I think Flutter Mane will be okay with Levitate. And plus, getting an immunity is never a bad thing, right? It gives us more opportunities to get in and click a button, which is always a good thing. Next up, we have Slither Wing, and this one was easy. I mean, come on, look at it. It makes so much sense. Slither Wing is going to be getting Fur Coat. Look how... I was going to say fluffy he is, but then he would have fluffy, and I don't want him to be weak to fire, or more weak to fire. But look how big and chunky he is. Look at all that fur on him. Look at all that fat and how bulky he is. I think having that as an ability would be absolutely incredible. The fur coat, really upping this thing's defense and making it a physically defensive monster. You have access to moves like Morning Sun and Will-O-Wisp, and alongside like you turning around and having first impression priority and having access to bulk up as well, I think this Pokemon could be really, really cool with an ability that boosts its defense up even higher, because the stat itself is pretty mediocre in 79, but then when we boost that up with the fur coat, with the fur coat, it's going to be absolutely obnoxious to try and KO from the physical side, and that bug fighting typing is going to, continue to be reserved for Pokemon who have decent physical bulk. Not necessarily Heracross as much, but especially something like a Buzzwole, so I think that'd be cool. It's like a, Earth prehistoric version of Buzzwole, which could be obviously really fun, so I'm definitely here for Slither Wing getting fur coat as its ability here for our experiment, at the very least. Next up, this is a really cool one suggested by Olivia Sama, because I was really having trouble with this Pokemon as well. That is going to be Sandy Shocks. Now, Magnet Pull is the obvious answer, right? But I think that's boring. I don't want Magnet Pull, especially because, I don't know, it's just boring. But the one that she came up with that I like more, and I think it would be more fun for it to have, is Earth Eater. If you guys don't know, Earth Eater is a signature ability of Orthworm right now, and it allows it to be immune to ground type moves. And I think that would be really cool on the prehistoric ground type of Sandy Shocks being immune to the ground that it, kind of domains or has domain over and controls and things like that. I think that could be really cool, and having an electric type that just eats up grounds is really, really awesome. Makes it where this thing gets infinite free volt switches, it gets infinite free spikes and stealth rock and a bunch of things like that, and it could really, really work out well. Plus the Earth Eater thing makes sense as well with it being magnets and, being attached to the ground. I don't know. I figured it could be cool. I really like Sandy Shocks, and I think it would be cool to give it a, nice little ground immunity. We have 2 ground immunities in the list too so far. I haven't noticed that, but yeah. Then we have Iron Treads, and another pretty easy one in my opinion. This is going to be Heavy Metal Iron Treads, and I really like this aspect of it, making it an absolute hefty boy, giving it really, really strong heavy slams every single time it clicks it. I'm not 100% sure on how heavy Iron Treads is. Let's see, Iron Treads weight 529 pounds, whatever that translates into kilograms. I'm sure that's a big number as well. We double that, and we have, a Pokemon that's 1,000, 60 pounds around there, and you're going to be absolutely smashing through some Pokemon with your Heavy Slam boosted, obviously, or your Heavy Metal boosted Heavy Slams, which is really, really cool. Pretty simple. It does make you a little bit weaker to Low Kick and Grass Knot, but I really like the boosted power of Heavy Slam, especially because, you have Pokemon like Great Tusk, which is going to be your counterpart having Headlong Rush and Close Combat and all these crazy high base power moves, where realistically Treads doesn't have that right now. So I think it'd be cool to give it just basically a guaranteed 120 base power Heavy Slam against whatever it wants to click against. And I think it's a pretty cool option for it. Not going to break it or anything like that, but it makes so much sense thematically, and it makes that Heavy Slam just a little bit stronger against a lot of Pokemon. Next up is the Bundler. Big Iron Bundle. And remember how I said I didn't want to break Flutter Mane? Well, I think I forgot about that, because sometimes, I don't know, you want to see the world burn or drown, because Iron Bundle, I would personally give it Swift Swim. I think it makes so much sense. This thing is blazingly fast. We put it in the water. It has the little freaking, it can use its little thingy as a propeller, like thing on its tail, and he could just through. Oh my gosh, I think it would be so much fun to use this thing to switch him. It would obviously break it to hell and back. It's already banned to Ubers, but it would not be allowed in Draft League anymore at all if I got access to switch him. I think that'd be a lot of fun. For a more tamed and toned down ability, Water Veil is an option, which makes sense more so. It isn't super great for it. Doesn't really benefit it all too much. Let me check, because I know it prevents you against burn. Yeah, it really prevents you against burn. That's about it. I think Live suggested Technician as well, which could be cool for your flip turns and things like that. But again, not the biggest deal in the world and not the biggest help for it in the world. But I think it'd be cool, and I'm definitely here for Bundle kind of getting broken. I don't know, I like Bundle. I think he's a cool guy. Give him Scald while you're at it. It doesn't make any sense, but you might as well, right? Okay, next up we have Iron Hands, and I don't know if there's an easier ability to give this Pokemon than Iron Fist. I mean, his name is Iron Hands. That's just basically Iron Fist, just said slightly differently. They opened up the thesaurus and they said, hands, fist, same thing. That's basically what it is. I think Iron Fist on this thing would be absolutely incredible with all the punching moves you're using between the elemental punches and things like that, alongside your Swords Dance sets and, your AV sets with Volt Switch. I think it would be absolutely incredible. You can also give this thing Guts, and that might super break it, just like regular Hariyama, but I think Iron Hands, or Iron Fist, see, I just mixed up the names, fits way, way better for the Iron Hands here, obviously, and it's a pretty easy one for sure. Next up, we have Iron Jugulis, and for this Pokemon, I elected to go Adaptability. Now, a lot of these future Pokemon, you can kind of understand adaptability. They're more digital looking and robotish looking and things like that. But I think Jugu, it really does make a lot of sense because one, look at the design, he's just robot Hydreigon. But two, if you look at this thing's move pool, it is absolutely insane. I could definitely see this computerized version of Hydreigon, like the computer / Hydra Pokemon, learning adaptability and being able to get a stab boost on either Dark and Flying or when you Terra this Pokemon, which is a phenomenal Terra Pokemon, with Flamethrower and Earth Power and Hydro Pump and Dragon Pulse and things like that. It getting that stab adaptability boost on top of the Terra boost could be absolutely terrifying. I think it would make this Pokemon much better too. It has a great speed tier in 108 and great special attack in 122. Giving it adaptability would really make it very, very solid in my opinion. So I'd love to see it get that ability, and I think it makes sense personally. So that's going to be Iron Jugulis. Next up is one of my favorite Paradox Pokemon in Iron Moth, and we're going to give this guy Flash Fire. I feel like it makes a ton of sense. It being immune to fire with its design, the way it looks, is pretty cool. Again, not going to break the Pokemon whatsoever, but it's always nice having immunities, especially if you have a team that's a little bit fire weak. Might think twice about giving that Iron Moth that fire boost, and really clicking a ridiculously strong Overheat if you're a spec set, or even just a Terra Fiery Dance with a Flash Fire boost is going to nuke through a lot of Pokemon and be really, really scary to switch into. So I definitely like it. It also really helps with Terra when you're tearing into a grass type. Now you're immune to fire opposed to being weak to it, which is really, really cool. And I guess other typings as well, like Steel and Bug, but you're typically not seeing those on Iron Moth. So realistically just grass. But I like that a lot. I think it could be a really cool aspect of it. And again, this Pokemon's incredible offensively great coverage. Giving it more switch-ins by giving it an immunity is always going to help it out without necessarily breaking it at the very least. Next up, we have the most disappointing Pokemon in Paldea, in my personal opinion, in Iron Thorns. Its defensive typing is just so bad, and offensively it's pretty mediocre as well, despite having a solid attack stat and an incredible offensive move pool. So what we decided to do for this Pokemon is giving it Sheer Force. I mean, if you look at this thing, it just makes sense when you look at the ability, you look at the description, you look at this absolute behemoth of a Pokemon. Mecha Tyranitar could definitely have some sheer force to him. And when you pair that alongside all of its coverage, and all of its coverage basically having secondary effects, this thing becomes an absolute monster to switch into and becomes so much more immediately threatening. Now, you don't really get rid of the defensive weaknesses that Iron Thorns does have, but with Terra you can patch it a little bit, and then with Sheer Force you are just clicking buttons and killing things. That is about it. It's very, very simple. Again, good hazard setter as well. And it really functions like a budget Nidoking that can set up hazards and sweep. I don't know, so even then, is it a budget Nidoking? I guess Nidoking's whole thing is it has a really good typing naturally, but with Iron Thorns it has a much better move pool, it has a higher attacking stat, and it can set up both hazards and Dragon Dance and do a bunch of things, so I'm definitely here for Iron Thorns. I think with Sheer Force it would actually be very, very usable and very, very cool, so Sheer Force really does make sense here. Next up is Walking Wake, and for this one we are going to go Storm Drain. I still want this to be the water type that you know, isn't the water type and like bullies other waters and functions in the sun. So you'd still obviously have your Hydro Steam move that's boosted in the sun, but being able to switch into opposing water types that might threaten your sun and just eat up their attack and, you know, get that special attack boost is really, really cool. I really like that aspect of Walking Wake, and I'd really like to see it blow some things up. I also had the suggestion of Quick Feet just because he runs on the water and he's supposed to be fast and blah, blah, which makes probably more sense thematically, but is a little bit more boring in my opinion, like competitively. And I really like Wake, and I want to see it like continue to thrive. And it's a Pokemon that actually really likes having photosynthesis as an ability, so getting rid of that is a little bit tough for it. So I figured Storm Drain was a nice, you know, middle ground between the two, but I could totally see it getting either which. Iron Leaves, another really easy one. This Pokemon screams sharpness, and it might actually be not terrible if it got sharpness between its new signature move, Psyblade, Leaf Blade, Sacred Sword, Night Slash. I'm pretty sure X-Scissor as well. Yep, it does get X-Scissor. This Pokemon would be very difficult to switch into, on top of that base 130 attack and then 104 speed. You can also Trailblaze out, so even without booster energy, you can boost your speed if you really need to. Trailblaze or Agility alongside Sword Stance and these moves is going to be really scary. And Sacred Sword with Sharpness is just an infinitely better close combat, so we'll definitely take those. I think that could be a really cool aspect of Iron Leaves. If we're able to get that ability, it would just massacre through teams. I mean, look at something like Gallade and think of how strong it is. Now think of Iron Leaves, which is like infinitely faster and, you know, can kind of win games a little bit easier and a little bit stronger, honestly. Glade's 125 and Iron Leaves is 130, so it would just be better Glade, which is really cool to see because it's pretty mediocre right now in my opinion, but it would be cool to see it get a little bit better. Second to last, we have my boy Roaring Moon, and as much as I wanted to give him a cool, unique new ability, Intimidate just fits way too well. I mean, look at this thing. He is terror incarnate. If you saw this thing coming at you with that base 119 speed flying down at you, you would be very intimidated. I'm just saying, you might be more than intimidated. You might be shitting yourself in fear. But again, the Pokemon is really, really darn cool. We thought about potentially Tough Claws, but his claws are a little too tiny, so I don't know if we can go with that. I think Intimidate fits really well. It's also going to allow it to set up those GDs much better, just like regular Salamence. And again, it makes sense. It's already in the line, whereas regular Salamance's, you know, normal ability, so giving it Intim here would be pretty cool. Then lastly, we have Iron Valiant. This is one I had a lot of trouble with because there was actually a lot of options that we came up with. The first of which is going to be Sharpness, but if you look at it, I don't think it would actually benefit Valiant all too much. Does it even get Sacred Sword? It doesn't even get Sacred Sword, which is pretty tough. It does get Psycho Cut, but I think if it got Sacred Sword, then that would be a little bit better and would make a little bit more sense. Do you even get Night Slash either? You get Night Slash, and let's see, do you get X-Scissor? You get X-Scissor. So I think if this thing got Sacred Sword, that Sharpness would be an easy answer. Pretty good. Justified was another one we thought of, just because it's similar to Glade. It kind of looks like a knight still. The only issue is if you look at Valiant's Pokedex entries, it like talks about how it's brutal and just like an absolute like monster and terrifying. So I don't think Justified, like the hero ability, fits it all too well. We ended up settling on Supreme Overlord. Again, if you look at those Pokedex entries and look how it's kind of described as like this ruthless leader and ruler, I think Supreme Overlord would work perfectly. It would make this Pokemon absolutely insane in the end game if you can find the opportunity to get it in. I think like Scarf Valiant or like even Trailblaze, or it doesn't get Trailblaze, unfortunate. Does it get Agility? It does get Agility. Like Agility endgame Valiant with Terra and Supreme Overlord would be almost unguardable. Like it would be absolutely terrifying to deal with that Pokemon. And I think it makes a lot of sense as it's like the end boss of the future Paradox Pokemon. He's the Supreme Overlord. I think it would be pretty darn cool. But yeah, that's going to be all the Paradox Pokemons and what abilities I would give them if they weren't, you know, locked into Photosynthesis and Quark Drive. Let me know if you guys have any cool ideas in the comments below. Drop the abilities you would put for all of these Pokemon down there. And yeah, and big shouts to this month's channel members and Matrix. Odds are Big Mouth, Zeke, D-Double, Olivia Sama, and Goosefart. I appreciate you all. And yeah, that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.